It's a great pleasure and honour to have a chance to talk to Partha Dasgupta, our first real conversation, I think. Partha, I always start by asking when and where you were born.
I was born on 17th November 1942, middle of the war, I guess, in Dhaka, in what is now in Bangladesh. But at that time it was, as you well know, undivided India.
And people like to sometimes go back. Well, I like them to go back over their ancestors. If you're a few Englishmen I know, you go back to 1066, but if you'd like to go back to your grandparents anyway, or whoever you know about.
Right, there's no risk of going too far back because we Indians haven't got that kind of record as you have. My maternal grandfather was a lawyer, and a pretty good one, I think fairly prosperous, in Dhaka. Certainly that's where my mother was born and raised. My paternal grandfather was born and raised in Barisal, which is also in now Bangladesh, but further down the Ganges and the Brahmaputra confluence, deep into the delta of Bangladesh. And my maternal grandfather, my paternal grandmother was also from there. So that fact that my father's side was, by the time my father was born, was pretty impoverished financially. But it was a family with a deep scholastic history. So we were essentially a family of scribes. If you get back to the 17th century, there's some records of the ancestors being scribes. Some of them actually made considerable reputation in Sanskrit scholarship, but that didn't translate itself into wealth, if you see what I mean. So my father had a very poor upbringing. His family was very poor. My father's father was, I think, a sort of a clerk in the local magistrate's office in Barisal, in this town of Barisal. Barisal is a town which is also in a district called Barisal, and my father was born in a village there called Goila. That's about it. My parents met in... Did
you know any of your grandparents?
No, they're both... all three of them died before I was born. I knew I apologize for saying no, I did know my mother's mother, my maternal grandmother. She died in 1956, so yes, I did know her. Rather well. She was a lady of considerable independence of mind, even although she came from a generation where women were not exactly prominent in the social sphere.
Tough character.
I won't say tough. She was actually, but by the time I met her, of course, she was quite old. I would say she was rather soft, but she was quite deliberate in that. I'll give you an example. One of my mother's sisters, who was quite a number of years older than my mother, was married off at the age of 13 to a rather rich family, so that was the good news. The bad news was that she was widowed at 15. And she remained a widow, of course. I knew her very well. But my grandmother took a stance subsequent to that, which meant that my mother didn't have to get married till she was 22, and she was given an education in the University of Dhaka. Because I think it was largely due to my grandmother. She put her foot down and saying this was not going to happen again.
Right. So moving on to your parents, what did they do and what was their character and influence on you?
Well, my mother raised a family. She was a graduate and had a deep interest in poetry, but I didn't... both Bengali and English, by the way, but I didn't really get to know that because her concerns were raising the family and looking after my father, who was, I won't say poorly in health, but she was particularly concerned that he lived well, comfortably, that is. And because he was a professor with a great number of students, and he was a very old-style professor, so students always came to our house, she became a surrogate mother for a rather large extended family, if you see what I mean. And so my own memory is pretty firmly that my sister and I have one sister older than I shared our parents with many young people who were coming in, staying, or certainly having lunch and dinner, and then many of them staying overnight if they happened to need the bed and so forth. So she was very hospitable, and she was a real mother figure, if you like, not just for us, but for the entire entourage that my father had through his being a teacher. My father was a economist, and he was a professor of economics, and subsequently starting in Dhaka, University of Dhaka. Then after a period of movement, he settled down in Banaras, now called Varanasi, as you know, and effectively retired from there as a professor, but he continued to work for quite a while. In fact, his last book came out when he was 85, arguably his best book.
What were their characters, and how did that shape you?
Well, my father had a extraordinary influence on me. There is no ifs and buts about it. In many ways, he was my closest friend, but closest friend in a Edwardian sense, I guess, in the sense that there would be many things I would never discuss with him, personal matters and so forth. But there is no question I would consult him on matters of scholarship, and we were very, very close because we both enjoyed each other's company. And he had an extraordinary influence on my life, on my upbringing, on my growth as a. What was he like? He was a rationalist. You must remember he imbibed, I suspect, in the University of Dhaka and even before, a combination of a sort of a deep-seated scholarly affection for scholarship, because of the scribal nature of his ancestry, I guess. Learning was hugely prized, even if you didn't have much money, but that's what mattered. But Bengal, as you well know, enjoyed an intellectual renaissance in the second half of the 19th century, influenced by the English, of course. So the Tagore's didn't come out of the blue. They came out of a fusion of inherent Brahminic culture and a 19th century import of utilitarian, rational thinking. I'm sure you're familiar with that. And I think these two combined to make my father an exceptionally interesting chap, interesting person. He was not religious at all, but he had a.
Were you Brahmins? Was the family Brahmin?
No, we are a subcaste. I think 2 rungs below the Brahmins proper. We are called Vaidyas. It's a subcaste.
It's a clean caste, though. I mean,
sorry?
It's a clean caste.
Oh, it's a clean caste, all right. I think the uncleanliness in us arose out of. There are 2 theories that I've heard. One was that we're a professional caste of medical practitioners and so forth. So one theory is that we started studying cadavers, and that demoted us. Another less aggressive story is that we started charging for our services, which also, which I don't know if either is true, by the way, but it is certainly the case that Vaidyas have a disproportionate number of professionals, teachers, lawyers, doctors, and so forth. But my father's father, in fact, although a fairly lowly clerk, I imagine, in a very provincial government office, had connections with some rather eminent thinkers in Bengal at that time, and they tried to start a new religion, what they called Satya Dharma. Satya means truth, and Dharma, well, is your allegiance. So the idea was that the God you believed in was truth. That's what you should be worshipping. So that seems to be, roughly speaking, the background. Now, my father had a very Spartan attitude to life. He was always clean, tidy, meticulous in his ways of doing things, but nothing fancy. So, and my mother was like that as well. So, but it was a comfortable existence. We had by the time I was growing up, my father had a fairly secure salary as a professor at Banaras Hindu University. So we were relatively comfortable by then. So I never saw any hardship. Not that my demands weren't very much, largely because it was in response to my family background. But certainly I never suffered from want of clothing or...
Did you hear about hardship? Because both you and I mean, I was a few hundred miles to the north at the time, 1943, Bengal famine, about which, of course, Amartya Sen and others have written, and you yourself have been very interested in these subjects. Do you think any of that background, when you were only 2 or 3, influenced you at all?
No, that would be disingenuous. No, I don't think so. I knew of it, of course, but only like many other things. The First World War or the Second World War. What I do recollect was something else, communal violence. That I do recollect, because even when we left, after we left Bengal, which was middle of 1946, as far as I know, we then went directly to Delhi, and we lived in Old Delhi, which had a very rather even mixture of Hindus and Muslims, and the mood was pretty tense every now and then there, and our younger friends would protect our flats from encroachment in case there was a problem. And in the event, there wasn't a problem, but there wasn't a problem for us. But communal violence was sporadic at that time, right through the northern India, and I'm conscious of that. I don't think the famine had any, other than some purely academic.
Why was there no problem? Because you're moving towards 47. Had you moved out of Delhi by the time?
No, we moved out of Dhaka.
Yes.
In middle of 46.
Yes, and then you moved to Delhi.
We moved to Delhi. My father didn't have a very satisfactory job there, and we were there for 6 months. And the moment he moved, he started getting offers from other places. So we moved from there to Cuttack for 6 months. While he was in Cuttack, he was offered the chair at Banaras.
So when the communal riots over the time of partition...
Oh, this was before the communal riots started, well before the partition. The partition was, of course, in some sense, the crescendo of the set of events, but communal tensions were there right through the war, I understand, as I understand it, but certainly 46, it was commonplace, and by end of 46, which is what my earliest memories are, actually not Dhaka, but Delhi. And there I do remember having to take, being shut in for the night, and with friends who were protecting, the young friends who came with bamboo sticks to protect the household from rioters in case there was. In the event, there weren't, by the way. But
are those your earliest memories, really?
Yeah, I think I can't recall anything from Dhaka days. I was all of November 42. We must have left about summer 46. So I was just over 3, no.
Mm.
My earliest memories are towards the end of our stay in Delhi.
Mm.
And that's sort of fleeting, by the way, just incident.
Mm.
But my proper memory is from the period we've been in Varanasi.
Mm.
We moved there about middle of 1947, autumn of 47, I think.
And what are your early memories of Varanasi?
Well, I had a very comfortable life. I wasn't sent to school until 8, and that happened when I was.
You didn't go to a kindergarten or anything?
No, my father. I once asked him why
Mm.
he didn't send me to school, and he said, "Well, you didn't look as though you were interested in studies.
Mm.
So why bother? You enjoyed playing with these street urchins and so forth." So I used to play all day long. I used to in the streets, and it was a nice life.
Mm.
I think I had a tutor who came once a week to teach me arithmetic and Hindi, since my mother tongue is Bengali.
Mm.
But aside from that, I didn't have any education until we moved to Washington in December 1950. So I had just turned 8. My father had gone for 3 years. It turned out to be for 3 years. He went to the IMF on secondment from the university, or on leave from the university. That's the more appropriate way of putting it, accurate way of putting it. And there, of course, education is compulsory, and it was a natural thing to do. I was enrolled into school, the local school. So it was at the ripe old age of 8 that I first went to school.
Do you remember in that sort of 5 to 8 period any particular interests or hobbies or
Cricket.
Cricket.
Yeah. I played cricket pretty much all day long with, as I say, with the whole bunch of sons of, our cleaning lady and his friends. So these kids were essentially street kids, or spent most of their time on the street, but on the university campus. So I used to supply the bat and the wooden ball and the sticks, and the rest was us. Okay.
So it was pretty carefree, happy childhood.
Very much so. Very much so, yeah.
And then was Washington a shock?
Washington, we missed. My memory is that we certainly missed India for about a month and a half. The whole family did. But after a while, we would just fit it in very nicely. My mother, for the first time, I think, had a certain amount of freedom from social obligations. And I think we were also financially much better off. I mean, even though my father had a good salary as professor, he had a lot of obligations towards his elder brother and his family. So we didn't see an awful lot of income coming our way. As you know, we have people inherit obligations. But I think the salary in the IMF was sufficiently large that for the first time my mother had felt that she could take us out to a concert, for example, and then we all would go and spend a nice evening, that sort of thing. So she had a terrific time, and so did I. And so did my sister. I think my father didn't like it quite as much because he missed the university campus life. And an office life was not his to the liking. But he had his nap after lunch, even at the IMF. If you called him between 1 and 1:30, his secretary would say, "Well, Professor Dasgupta is having a nap."
It's very frank.
So,
do you remember your first school in Washington?
Oh yeah. Yes, I've been there since.
Have you?
Bancroft School, yes. It was a very, very good school. Nothing exceptional about it. It was the local public school, state school, that is. But in those days, I guess America was really well ahead in elementary schooling because you had much more freedom than as I understand it, compared to the British school system. I had some marvelous teachers. You had these great teachers, if you like, each year. My memory is, and of course I fell in love for the first time.
Why do you say of course? That 8 is not always the age.
Well, isn't that the time when you But it changed.
It was a mixed school, was it? I mean,
Oh
boys and
yes.
girls.
Oh yeah. These are state schools in America. Were all mixed.
Yeah.
And but when I say I fell in love, of course, I was falling in love every 2-3 months. So.
And were you already beginning to find any particular subjects? I mean, this is between 8 and 11. You were enjoying more than others?
I can't recall any. I think I liked geography a bit, but geography there was very location specific. So, for example, it might be the geography of Washington, which is essentially a layout of the streets and avenues and lanes and so forth, and where the buildings are. But it involved making little models, building them, that is, with paper mache. I think I enjoyed that. So I can't say there was anything grabbing me. I used to play baseball quite a bit. Softball, rather.
That took over from cricket.
Cricket, I guess. Yes, that's right. And I had, again, a very free life there. Yeah.
And there weren't any teachers at that stage who particularly shaped you? Probably later.
No, I can't say anybody shaped me. I was very fond of Mrs. Dietz, who was my great teacher in my second year, I think, if I remember correctly. And just the other day, I rediscovered a book she had given me in 1952 called Great Composers, Lives of Great Composers, written for kids. And she had there's a lovely inscription in it, because she was thanking me at the end of the school term for the help I'd given her, which presumably meant I wiped the blackboard in the evening and stayed on for certain chores that she asked me to perform.
That's nice.
So, yeah, so I remember her. She was elderly lady, Mrs. Dietz. But I can't say that I have any memory of intellectual growth in anything other than the normal sense of the time. Yeah.
Then you went back, presumably, to your next school.
We went back. My father went to the IMF because he had been asked by the finance minister of India to go and represent India, as he was chief of the South Asian department at the IMF. So it was a pretty good post. But he was rather reluctant to leave the university, so he had said no to begin with. And then they said, well, look, come on, you can go for 2 years. But once he got there, all his friends, who were far more intelligent than he did, urged him to stay on for 3 years, because that way he would be eligible for a pension, which he never worried about in those days, an IMF pension. So once they put a lot of pressure on him, he decided to stay for a 3rd year. It made rational sense, of course. But he stayed there exactly 1 day more than was absolutely essential in order to qualify for the pension. By the way, I should tell you that pension saved him, because he didn't have any inherited wealth, absolutely none at all. So he had quite a comfortable retirement, because the small pension he had from the IMF, when converted into rupees, was not quite negligible. So we went back, yes. We went back in November 1953. So we were there nearly 3 years, just under 3 years.
And you went back to Banaras?
We went back to Varanasi, yes. Yeah.
He went back to the same job, and you went to it. By this time you're about...
I was 11.
11. So do you go on to another kind of
Now
school?
I went to school, yes. Now I was sent to... Now my father, when I say my father did this or my father did that, I mean that I discussed it with him later on in life, and he explained. So his reasoning was that I had learnt English rather fluently, obviously, 3 years. And at that time in Varanasi or Banaras, the medium of instruction was all in Hindi. And he felt that I would lose my fluency in English if I went to a Hindi-speaking school. Now, there was no English-speaking school in Varanasi or Banaras at that time. And the nearest that he could locate, which had a good reputation, was a public school called La Martiniere.
How do you spell that?
L-A. And
is
then
it French?
Yes, Claude Martin. I guess. Martiniere. It's a pretty famous public school in India. There is a campus in Calcutta and a campus in Lucknow, and there is a girls' campus in each of these cities as well. So I went there for, well, as it happened, for 2.5 years.
Where was it? Which
Lucknow, sorry, I should have mentioned. It's in Lucknow. It's about 180 miles from Varanasi.
So it's sort of based on British public schools?
Very much so, yeah.
Any particular public school, or is it just...
I wouldn't know, but I hated it, so...
Yeah.
It was the...
What was so awful about it? I mean...
I think it's probably, objectively speaking, it was a pretty reasonable place. Certainly many of my other friends seemed to be very happy there, or comfortable there anyway. But I think in contrast to the kind of life I had enjoyed till that age, this was very regimented. There was corporal punishment. In case I was perfectly, I think, knowingly I didn't do anything wrong, that I know. But you would get mass caning, if you like, if the person who had done something naughty didn't own up. And I sort of felt that was...
So you were caned?
I was caned, yes. I was caned, yeah.
And you were doing... Did you do any Hindi or local languages, or was it just...
Oh yes, no, we were taught Hindi. We were taught Hindi, but not as a second language, which had some problems later, but at least there, English was the medium of instruction. Hindi was a secondary language that you learned as one of the several subjects you had.
And it was boarding, of course. You were away from
I was
home.
in boarding.
It's the first time you'd been away from home.
Yes, and first time, and also, as it turned out, that was the last time I ever lived at home. From then on, it was always
boarding or something.
That's right.
And it was single sex as well, presumably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there was a girls' campus, but it was some miles away.
Did they do Latin?
Yes, we had Latin. I got 5 out of 100. It was, I don't believe it was well taught either. It was declensions, I guess.
Nothing excited you particularly academically?
I got nothing out of that place.
But
Absolutely
you played
nothing.
cricket?
I played some cricket, but not much. I think I was pretty unhappy there, I think. Had some friends. But I can't recall being excited by anything. Or I did pretty well in the exams. It was fine. Sort of stood 4th or 5th in class or something like that, which is reasonable.
What ended it? Right.
I was very unhappy, and I think I remember mentioning it to my sister, who is somewhat older than I am. She's 5 years older than I am. And that summer of '56, when I came home, I was telling her about it, but I wouldn't deign to tell my parents that I didn't like it, because it would be problems. I needed an education. But my sister went and told them that nothing doing. He's not going back. So at that point, my father made some inquiries, and there was a school about 10 miles away from the campus, which was a Hindi, medium of instruction was Hindi. But it was a remarkable school, and so my father thought that by then I was 13. In any case, it wasn't clear where else I could go. So he talked to some of his friends who advised him that would be a good place. And
so this was also in Lucknow?
No, this was in Banaras. This is only 10 miles away from home.
I see. Yeah.
And we still lived on campus at Banaras. Yes.
So did you board there?
I boarded there. It's about 10 miles away. In those days, 10 miles is a heck of a distance. Rickshaw and so forth. So yes, I boarded there.
And it was better?
Oh, it was extraordinarily good. It was the place which made me, in many ways.
What was it called?
Rajghat. It was Rajghat is the place. It's a fort. It's the campus itself is in the middle of a forest, essentially, and so they've made clearings and plonked some buildings for hostels and classrooms and so forth. And the this particular land, about 400 acres of it, is on a plateau overlooking the Ganges and a tributary called the Varuna, which meets up with the Ganges. So it's at that corner. So you see these two rivers, one a small rivulet in the winter, but can become quite wide in the monsoons, and the gigantic, slow-flowing Ganges, which is extraordinarily beautiful. It was founded by a very eccentric lady, and a great lady you may have heard of, called Annie Besant.
Of course, yes.
She was a theosophist, and as the paradoxical nature of Indo-European or Indo-British relationship, she was also president of the Congress Party. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
I can't remember when. Late 19th century, late 19th century, early 20th century, I think. Now, she founded this theosophical school. So this was called Besant Theosophical School, and it was somewhere else, not where I went to school, but it was somewhere else in Banaras, some miles away. But she discovered with one of her, she decided there was a young man she had met in South India somewhere, whom she decided was going to be something like the Messiah. And he turned out very well. There's a man called J. Krishnamurti, a very famous thinker of the second half of the 20th century, I guess, in India. And he had a great following in the continental Europe, in England and the United States as well. Anyway, so since he was part of Annie Besant's school, our school, of course, listened to him too. But then he broke away from the Theosophical Society. He was a very spiritual man, but it was very anti-formal religion, anti-leadership, anti-authoritarian strictures. So when he broke away, the school followed him. So it was we were part of the Krishnamoorthy Foundation. And sometime, I think in the 1930s, the school moved to the campus I was at. And it was really remarkable. There's no question about it. I had some phenomenal teachers. And
any you particularly remember? Or
I remember quite a number of them. I'll tell you in a minute, I had some occasion to remember them as well. I went back to my school last month for the first time. And my wife was with me, and we spent a whole week on campus. So when I introduced myself to my school about 3 months ago by letter, saying we were coming, and could I spend some time on campus, I of course wrote about my teachers. So who were my great teachers there? See, the average quality of teaching was just exceptional, because this is not a sentimental man speaking about his childhood days. It's that because Krishnamurti was so influential, most of my teachers went there to teach because they were followers of Krishnamurti. So the kind of people who taught there wouldn't have normally become school teachers. And in India, as like in many other countries, or most other countries, school teaching is not the first port of call for somebody who's academically excellent.
Well, it was in this country after the Second World War, because of the shortage of posts. Sure.
But typically
But usually it isn't.
It isn't. So I had some fantastic people teaching me. They were real. It was their vocation. I think the people who influenced me most was my physics teacher there, Shashi Bhushan Mishra. He taught chemistry as well. Remember, I was 13 to 50, that age period. So when I graduated from school at 15, it would be a bit like a year before O levels, I guess, or a bit before GCSEs, maybe even a bit before that. But at that time, the schooling system was 10 years and then 2 years of intermediate college, and then 2 years bachelor and then 2 years master. So you ended up approximately the same as here. At the age of 21, you came out of, or 22, you came out of the university system. You went through the whole route before hitting PhD, if you wish to. So I had those two. He was very good in physics and chemistry. He was really quite fantastic. But I think the person who, in many ways, influenced me the most was my geography teacher, Viswanathan. He was quite remarkable. And I think on reflection, I think I had a very delayed reaction to his teaching by something like, let's say, 25, 30 years, because I like to think now that my real genuine interest in nature arose out of those 2 years of classes with him. He was phenomenally good. Then I had a fantastic teacher in English. He was a great man. He, Tarapada Bhattacharya, is a Bengali gentleman. And he lived a bachelor's life in a room in one of the dorms, in one of the hostels. So he had a room, say, half the size of this one. Approximately, that's about right. And all his worldly possessions were there. And towards the end of my first year, I remember, I was ill for a few days, fever or something like that. So when I was recovering, I went to him to borrow something to read, because I'd been asked to take it easy with regard to classwork for a few days till I was fully back in shape. So I knew he had novels in his room, but I hadn't known that actually in his room, he didn't have any place in his room, of course. So he had a trunk, and the trunk contained his books. And so I went and asked for a book, and I picked up one, and it turned out it happened to be The Woodlanders. And I asked if I could borrow that, and he said, he looked a bit doubtful, but he said, fine, go ahead. And I read it, and I think I read it over the weekend. Came back and asked for some more. And he asked me what it was that I liked about it, and I told him. And he said, yes, you can have another one. Have you ever heard of Dickens? That is a great writer. So he picked up a couple of Dickens. But my eyes were on Hardy, because I had read The Woodlanders. So I saw Jude. So I picked that up and said, can I borrow this? Now, I still remember he was extremely distressed, because he had a dilemma. You can guess what the dilemma is. I'm a 13-year-old, and he does not want me to read Hardy too much. Much better if I read, say, Great Expectations. But on the other hand, as a scholar, how could he say no to somebody who wants to read Hardy? So of course I took Jude, and he was extremely worried about it. And I read Jude, and I could see that it was pretty heavy-duty stuff. But of course I loved it. So the next book I borrowed was Tess. So I worked through Hardy that winter. But of course he was very pleased. We used to have chats about Hardy's. But he said that when you grow up, then do read Dickens.
Usually the other way around. What other things were you doing at the school? I mean, do you do music or drama?
No, I did cricket. I played cricket. I was captain of the cricket team, and that worked very well as well.
No other sort of hobbies? I mean, drama or acting?
No. I didn't do any. I didn't have any skills in that direction. I played cricket. It was a very good 2 years. Yeah, it was very productive. On reflection, I was very happy there.
And you said the philosophy or the atmosphere was special. In what way? I mean, was it there was no corporal punishment?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It was a very liberal school, but not liberal in the Russellian sense that he tried out in his school. It was, with strict codes of conduct, obviously, but they were all somehow these injunctions were not injunctions. It was the right thing to do, the natural thing to do. It was quite a bear in mind, people who were addressing us in assembly were some of the deepest minds around. I mean, the school campus housed not just the teachers, but a large number of, when I say large number, maybe half a dozen very, very eminent retired people. They were also Krishnamurthi's friends and admirers. So they settled there. And these were some very, very distinguished names, from politics, from the civil servants, from the legal profession. So the kind of people who addressed us was cut above what most schools would be able to invite in the natural course of events, not just for special days, Foundation Day or something. I mean, the people you'd bump
into. They treated you as...
They treated us with a great deal of respect, yeah. Krishnamurti himself I met on several occasions. He used to come, on both the years I was there, he spent a month and a half each year on campus. Now, he couldn't speak Hindi. So because of that, I was encouraged to go and accompany him when he wanted to go for a walk and needed company or asked for some company. I was the only kid on the block who could have a conversation with him, at least in terms of having a common language. Now, it's not exactly that I'm a great admirer. In fact, I'm not at all an admirer of a good deal of what Krishnamurti wrote, because I couldn't, largely because I guess I didn't understand it. But for a 13, 14-year-old kid to have somebody of that stature go for walks with you and make observations about the world around you, that's pretty nifty, I think.
Wonderful, yes. What about religion? I mean, you said your parents weren't particularly religious, and yet you're in a kind of mystical, spiritual, and in Besant, Krishnamurti zone. Has religion been important to you?
No, not a bit. I'm certainly not religious in any conventional sense of the term, in the sense of a deity but I've never had any hostility towards religion, except in the obvious sense when it turns ugly, which it so often does. But I wouldn't ever go on making a song and dance about it, because it's so transparently bad news. But the goodness of religion is also very eminently obvious to me. But I've never shared that. I haven't had any religious feelings. But Krishnamurti, remember, is not, he was more spiritual rather than religious. In fact, he's not religious at all. And I can't say that I got necessarily much out of Krishnamurti, because I didn't understand him, frankly. That was as simple as that. It's tough stuff, and I haven't tried to read him either in recent years. But you see, when scientists, my physicist friends say, or biology friends rightly say, that you can't but be absolutely awestruck by the beauty of nature, or the beauty of the hidden truths that nature has on offer. I understand that absolutely perfectly. And that's a religious feeling too. If you call that a religious feeling, which I think it probably is, I have it.
But you don't go to St. John's College Chapel much?
Oh, I do sometimes. I have because the music is wonderful. Plus the atmosphere is exceptional. It's I think what it was designed for, period of reflection. I'm used to having assembly, sitting at assembly, which is what I used to have every day in the school I'm mentioning. For 15 minutes you sat on the floor and listened to some wonderful music, which was Sanskritic, of devotional songs from the Middle Ages, or chants from the Upanishads. And the words in them are quite exceptional. I mean, they are the thoughts that are being expressed are, to me, they're the kinds of thoughts that we all have sometimes, which is a sense of awe about the way the world works, societies work. In my case, of course, eventually I try to understand society, not so much the natural world. The hidden truths that are there to be uncovered, they invite, their recognition invites a sense of, oh, I share that. And my mother wasn't, I wouldn't say she was religious, but she certainly was a Hindu, practicing Hindu. Our house had a small icon, image of Lakshmi, goddess Lakshmi, because my mother had been given it from my parents' home as part of the bridal package, wedding package. And so she prayed to it every day, twice a day, with flowers and so forth. But her prayers were very worldly in the sense that her mind was in the kitchen, even when she prayed, if you see what I mean. And whenever I went home from school or college or from here, one of the first things she would do is to say, well, I must go and say thanks to such and such deity, to a temple. And of course I would go with her, because I think she liked the fact that I accompanied her. But I saw no difficulty doing that, or going into St. John's College Chapel, or indeed King's Chapel, and spending an hour or so being part of a mindset which is at its most reflective, or I like to think that. So.
Nice. Right, so then you're still quite young, 15, 16. You go on to another school.
Yeah, no. In those days, school ended when you were about 15, after 10 years of schooling. You then went to what, I guess it was instituted by the Brits, I guess, called intermediate college. It was a 2-year...
It's like a sixth form college here.
I guess that's right, exactly. And then you had 2 years of bachelor's and 2 years of master's, as I mentioned. But India was going through this flux, so my father and mother moved in the summer of 1958 to New Delhi. He gave up his chair. And Delhi had the best university at that time. So it made sense for me to not go to Banaras in the university, but to go to Delhi. Now, Delhi had a different system. It had 11 years. And then 3 years of a bachelor and 2 years of master's. But of course I had 10 years. So the University of Delhi had a couple of colleges which offered a 1-year transitional year of education. They called it the pre-university degree. So I enrolled in one of those colleges, did that, and then moved to the bachelor's program in the University of Delhi. And I was there all of 4 years before coming to Cambridge. Yeah.
And what did you do at?
I did in physics. I took honors in physics. Yeah, that was nothing extraordinary about that. It wasn't as though I was dying to do physics. I think at that stage I wasn't driven by any particular subject, but it was much more sociological, something that you would appreciate, which is good students did physics in those days. So I studied physics. I had done pretty well in the exams up to then, so I took the easy route, or if you like, the socially commendable route of studying physics. And it was a very good physics department.
Was it?
Oh yeah.
Do you remember any of the teachers there particularly?
Yeah. Yes, indeed. And they were good. Oh yeah. Well, they were not necessarily great teachers, but they were pretty well known physicists. By then, I'd come to the stage where I could recognize that Professor X is in this textbook,
Mm.
or has been cited by some great man, and so forth. So we took a great deal of pride in the fact that we were being taught by some significant figures.
Were there any? Have you kept in touch with any of the people who did the degree with you then?
Odd. The answer is no. And I began by saying odd, but actually it's not all that odd, because my generation, I graduated out of Delhi University in 1962, and most good students then, within a year or two, would find some scholarship in the States and to do their PhD. I mean, if they were going in that direction anyway. This is before the days of the internet. So you really lost touch unless you kept in touch by mail. Now, at that age, when you're 20, 21, 22, that period, you're busy working away. You've made new friends elsewhere. So you've got a scattered body. There's no common home front. Plus, Delhi had the unfortunate, both fortunate and unfortunate feature that Delhi is, remember, is like Washington. It's a nobody's place, or it used not to be anybody's place, because it was a center of government and diplomacy and so forth. So most people were migrants, including civil servants. So it's not as though, if I had been in Banaras, probably I would have had lots of friends from the neighborhood, and so you would then congregate periodically when you went home. But you have the scattered people all living in my case, we were in boarding anyway, so their parents were somewhere else, mine were in Delhi. So no, we didn't keep in touch. I know a few by reputation, but it's been so many years since we were in contact that it's...
Were there any... So far, I get a picture of you as a hardy, reading, hard-working scientist who plays cricket, but no other kind of hobby interests?
Yeah, started getting an interest, again, due to illness. I had, I think, mumps or something in my second year at Delhi. So I was fairly weak. So I went to the library, university library, when I was recovering, and in search of books to read. And I happened to be at the part of the library which housed theatre, plays, drama. And I picked up some of these volumes which were collections of American plays, New York Critics Award plays, Pulitzer Prize plays, and so forth. They have these anthologies. I got hooked into that in a big way, and that had a lasting impression on me. So I read, over this 3-year period, I read, I think, pretty much all of ONeill, all of Williams, of course, Miller. Mamet and others hadn't made the scene yet. But also a number of outstanding playwrights of the 1930s who are not that often performed anymore. Sherwood Anderson, Maxwell Anderson, Clifford Odets. These were pretty good playwrights, actually. But the drawback was, my reading was that in Delhi there was no theatre, so at least not that I can remember. So reading was my way of entry into the world of drama, which of course has influenced my life a lot since coming to England, because my wife and I do go to the theatre a lot, and I do it. I go to it quite assiduously and with a certain amount of background knowledge of what I'm watching. Yeah.
What about music?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of, yes, I do have a great deal of interest in music, because, well, I should have mentioned when I was in Washington, I got hugely interested in classical music, again, accidentally. So you had these long summer days. In America, you have these long summer breaks, and my father was at IMF, so he didn't have that much leave. We lived at home. So I was a bit like an urchin. I used to go around, going from shop to shop, looking at things. And there was a particular record shop, not quite near our house, about half a mile away from our house in Washington. I used to go regularly to. And in those days, life was a lot more leisurely, so you could listen to a record before buying, if you wished to buy. I mean, you had that kind of, I don't know if you have it in England in the old days, but now you don't.
Oh, you used to, yes.
You could go and you had a booth. Or
yes.
So I started listening to music there. And because I was very young, they realized I didn't have enough money to buy, so they allowed me to listen, and maybe once every month I would buy one LP. So I remember the first one I bought was Brahms' First Symphony. And that impressed them, I think. It was a rather eccentric choice for a 9-year-old or so. But I wasn't taught an instrument, so I knew not. And that interest in classical music effectively died while I was in India. Because these vinyl records, of course, they deteriorated. And I couldn't even get needles, a replacement in Banaras, so it all fell apart. So my interest in music sort of resurfaced after I got married here, because my wife plays the piano. But I have no understanding of music. And certainly, in some ways, I understand the theatre better than I do music. So in some sense, I can claim some expertise on the theatre, but on not only the dramatists themselves or the dramatic art form, but maybe even staging and so forth. In a way, I couldn't about music. I have a great deal of interest in it, but very much like the normal listener. Nothing beyond
I mean,
that.
does it affect you? Some people work to music or listen to music and are inspired, or
No, none at all.
It's just relaxing. And
Yeah, it's not. If somebody played a record while I was working, it was not going to harm my work, hurt my work at all. But I'm completely oblivious of anything that's happening, whether it's loud noise outside, banging, or while I'm at work. So, yeah, it's not something that has. Music hasn't inspired me in any fundamental way. I can't remember a great moment where I had an idea and I felt I could attribute it to a moment of realization arising out of some piece of music I've been listening.
some people liken mathematics to music. There's a purity to them both. The last of the art, well, not the last, but another art, that is painting and plastic arts. Has that meant anything to you?
Well, no more than most other people. I have no facility in that direction. I have been privileged enough, because I have a privileged life, in being able to visit galleries, but I sometimes feel it's a big waste. In fact, I feel very often this, particularly as I grow older, that I've had this enormous privilege of being able to go to concerts and go to some of the great art galleries and see, and not just great art galleries, but small minor churches. And minor churches in off the beaten track churches in Italy, and you get masterly painting that you see. Whereas I've had all that opportunity, whereas a good art student could have done wonders with that experience, but well, he or she won't be able to do it, but I can. So in a way, it's a bit of a waste. In fact, more than a bit of a waste, but that's how it is. So many things in the world.